Hey everyone, it's Phil Wade. How are you tonight? Thank you so much for being here. If you could type in the box and say hello, let me know you can hear me, see me. We'll get going in just a moment. Hey Peggy, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Hey Kia, how are you? Usually this training we don't get quite as many people. Maybe it's training fatigue. I don't know, but this is an important one, and I really appreciate you guys being here. Possibly some more folks will join on as we kind of get going. But let's get started. If you have any questions, as we're kind of going through everything, just type them in the box, and happy to answer them. All right. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about I call it the office policies and procedures, but it's not really that. It's more important real estate concepts. Quite honestly. And then just quickly, we're going to go through, some of the other Dalton Way trainings. So you kind of, know of them, and, hopefully you can check those out. They kind of all go together. So, yeah. All right. Let me move the slide. And, hey, Maria, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Did you get that YouTube link? I believe, Cheryl sent that over to you. So hopefully you were able to check that out. Awesome. All right. So let's get rolling. Absolutely, my pleasure. So first thing we're going to talk about is agency. So agency is how we represent our clients, right? We can do that three ways. One way, single agent, meaning we're only representing them. Transaction broker, right? In Florida, the default is always transaction broker. So you're always a transaction broker, right? You don't need anything signed. You're just assumed to be a transaction broker. That is the default. And then the last one is called non-agent or non-brokerage relationship, meaning we don't have a relationship with that client, and it is explicit that we don't have that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in a bit about where that might pop up, right? So again, default transaction broker, right? So we're always considered to be a transaction broker. Transaction broker has some benefits. Peggy can be the listing agent, and Maria can have the buyer, and we can do that transaction. Even though they're both Dalton Wade agents, right? We can do that transaction. We can represent both sides. Kia can have the listing, and he can have the buyer. He can have both sides. That is the advantage of being a transaction broker. It allows you to have both sides of the transaction. When you're a single agent, you can't do that, right? You can only either represent the buyer or the seller, and actually no one else from Dalton Wade can be involved. So again, if you're a single agent, sometimes agents like to communicate, hey, I'm a single agent, I'm going to only represent you, blah, blah, blah. But then, they're unable to really show any Dalton Wade properties because, again, when the brokerage, either one agent or two agents are working on that transaction, we have to be neutral. So again, we're allowed to be a transaction broker on both sides, but then we have to be neutral. What is neutrality? Neutrality means we're not really favoring the seller or the buyer or either party. When you're a single agent, you're only representing that side, right? And you're only representing them. However, in most situations, right, in most transactions, even though we're a transaction broker, there's another brokerage. Either the listing brokerage is different, or you're the listing agent, and the buyer is being represented by someone else from a different brokerage. So then, right, even though we're a transaction broker, we can advocate for our client. Meaning, if you're the listing agent, you're going to try to get them, the seller, the most money possible. If you're working with a buyer, you're going to try to buy that property for them for the least amount of money. Same as a single agent. Can't do that when we have both sides. That what allows us to have both sides is that neutrality. We're neutral. We're just facilitators. We're facilitating that transaction. All right, a little bit more about transaction broker. Limited confidentiality. Limited confidentiality. So what has to be kept confidential? What has to be kept confidential is what a seller will accept, right? Or what a buyer will pay. Let me give you an example. So Maria is representing the buyer, and let's pretend I'm not with Dalton Wade, and I'm the listing agent, and she sends in that offer, and I call her back. It's Friday night. I'm like, hey, Maria, thanks for sending in that offer. Let's get this wrapped up. It's the weekend. Let's get this under agreement now. What's your client's number? What's your client willing to pay? Let's get this done. And they start pressing on you, pushing you a little bit, right? And then your client said, oh, let's start at 375, but I'm willing to go up to 390. I really like this property. Really like this home. And then that offer went in at 375, and then Phil's pressing on Maria, and she spills the beans. And tell me 390. That would be a problem, right? She kind of didn't adhere to the limited confidentiality. Think about it. What would your client think? What would that buyer think if you did that? They wouldn't be happy. So what a seller will pay, or what a seller will accept, they would be upset. Absolutely. Right. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, oh, I'm not really sure. Do you have a counter for me? Just push them back, and you kind of don't spill the beans, right? All right. Transaction broker. Non-agent. Let's talk a little bit about that. Where might that come up? So let's just say you're working with a buyer and you see a FSBO, for sale by owner. And you call up that for sale by owner and you say to them, hey, I have a buyer that's interested in your property. Will you pay me a commission? So when the property is on the MLS, we are pretty much, I've never, ever had an exception to this. We're kind of guaranteed the commission, right? Everybody, that other brokerage doesn't pay the commission, they're kicked out. Nobody does that. But a FSBO, they're not on the MLS. So you got to negotiate your commission. You're going to do that through a commission agreement. To form and dot loop, you're going to get that, seller to sort of, say, hey, I'm willing to pay you 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is, via a commission agreement. We've had a couple of situations where the agent, right, representing the buyer, puts in the contract, puts in the as-is contract in the additional terms, seller to pay Dalton Wade 2.5%. And then they get to closing and the seller says, I'm not paying you anything. Some of these FSBOs are, maybe not the nicest people, many are, but there's some slick ones out there, again, tend to be flippers, investors, right? That kind of ilk, right? So guess what? The agent didn't get paid. We are not part of the contract. Sometimes agents think, oh, like I didn't sign the contract. You didn't sign the contract. All our names are there to let the title company know who earned the commission, right? So if you're ever dealing with a FSBO, you always want to get a commission agreement, or if that property is not in the MLS, you always want to get a commission agreement. A commission agreement is a legally enforceable document, right? If that, seller doesn't pay us, we can haul them into court and we will win because they promised us legally they were going to pay us. Now, remember what I said. We're always a transaction broker unless otherwise disclosed. So guess what? You're under agreement now with that for sale by owner, and now you're a transaction broker. You're actually representing the FSBO seller as a transaction broker. And again, now you have to be neutral, right? Because you got both sides. You got the seller and the buyer. Maybe you don't want to be neutral. Maybe you don't want to be working with that FSBO. what you would need from them is a non-brokerage relationship, right? Saying, hey, you're signing something that says Dalton Wade does not represent you. You're a FSBO, you're on your own, right? So we'd want to get that non-brokerage relationship. Possibly you're selling your own home, right? You're selling your own home and a buyer approaches you and you want to go under agreement with it because you don't have to pay a commission. You'd have to get a non-brokerage relationship from that buyer. Why? Because again, it's your own home. You can't be neutral, right? You have a vested interest, right? You're going to represent yourself. So again, we would want that non-brokerage relationship. So we always want to understand how we're representing our clients, kind of how everything works. Any questions before we move on to fair housing? All right, if you do, type them in. Sometimes this can be a little confusing, but hopefully everybody has a good understanding. Let's talk a little bit about fair housing. Very, very sad, right? Very sad that in 2023, we still have to have a law called fair housing in place to protect certain groups of people. I know none of you would ever discriminate against somebody. I know that. But sometimes our clients might, and then we kind of get dragged into it. And we have to be careful, right? We have to be careful. So again, where does fair housing rear its ugly head? Primarily, what I found is in rentals. Rentals. You're the leasing agent, right? You're leasing that property for one of your clients, and so let's talk a little bit about the protected classes. Who are they? Race. Can't discriminate against somebody based on their race, their religion, their national origin, meaning where they're from, their familial status if they have children, right? Their sexual orientation, right? You can't discriminate against that. If the person has a disability, can't be discriminated against, right? So there's a whole group of people that potentially, we just have to treat them fairly, and we want to treat them fairly. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, kind of what I've come up with, I think it's pretty effective. So there's really three criteria when you're renting a property to somebody. One, income. How much money do they make? Two, what's their credit score? And then three, can they pass a background check? Can they be approved? So before you go live, right, with that listing, with that rental, you have a conversation with the landlord and you say, hey, if the person has a 680 credit score or higher, they make $85,000 a year or more, and they can pass that background check, we're going to rent it to them. It takes all the subjectivity out of it. So the first person that meets those three tests, those three criteria, is who you rent it to, right? It takes, who is that person? Maybe they don't like that right? It takes all that right out of it, and you will never, ever have an issue with fair housing. A couple other things around fair housing. So fair housing is a federal law, right? It's a federal law. It's been around, for over 50 years now. And we have these protected classes, right? But then in Florida, and again, I've only had a few times in my entire real estate career, as the broker here in Florida, probably 35,000 closings. We've had to pay out on our E&O maybe 4 times, not a lot, but 2 of them were fair housing complaints. One time, right, the agent, writes in the description, in the realtor remarks and in the public remarks, no Section 8. Everybody know what Section 8 is? Section 8 is a program. It's a federal program to help people have housing. Maybe they're, not as fortunate. They are short on, their money, whatever. And, the government helps them through the Section 8 program. So the agent, and she's leasing her own property, writes in the realtor remarks and the public remarks, no Section 8. So many of the counties in Florida, they go a step beyond, where you cannot discriminate against somebody based on where they get their income. And what there are with fair housing, there are what are called testers. And all they do all day long is look at those rental listings. And if there's something in there, and again, this was like, I talked to our attorney, and like, we had no defense. We are wrong. We are paying out. We are paying out. She messed up. Had one this year where the agent, and again, very unintentional, she writes in the listing, in the rental agreement, tenant needs to pass a clear background check. A clear background check. And that word clear got us in trouble. And I'm like, okay. and the reason why it's problematic is because African Americans have been arrested at a much higher rate than other groups. And that clear background check became discriminatory against them. And we lost. It wasn't a huge penalty, but still, right? So you can't say stuff like that. And then the other one, yeah, I mean, these are things like, again, she had no idea, but she got tripped up, right? And then the other one we see, and this was one where we're helping the tenant. So the tenant has 2 service dogs, 2 emotional support dogs, right? And they have all the papers, they have everything that they need in order to have, they have a disability. And that dog or dogs helps them with their disability. So we're working with the tenant, and 2 agents, 2 different properties to lease, both say to the agent, point blank, we're not renting the property to your client because of the emotional support animals. Think of that. Could you say to somebody in a wheelchair, I'm not releasing this to you because you're in a wheelchair, you have a disability? No, it's the same concept, right? Can't say that. So you got to be careful. I mean, these 2 agents were, I'll put them in the, say it a little differently, not too bright category, right? Not too, like they put it right in the email. Maybe they thought that, and maybe their client didn't want to, rent it to them because of the dogs. You don't tell them that. Again, the tenant didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to pursue it, but he could have, and he would have won. He would have won. They discriminated against him. Can't do that. So there's a much higher probability of a problem with fair housing around rentals, right? You have a lot more people applying, how you're processing those people. Again, you need to be fair. And again, if you have that criteria, certain credit score, certain income, pass that background check, not a clear background, but pass a background check, all is good. You'll never have an issue. That's rentals. Where does it pop up in purchases? I can't tell you, when I was out in production, how many people would ask me, what do you think of the neighborhood? Buyers, what do you think of the neighborhood? And what I used to tell them is, I really can't comment. There's a federal law called fair housing that kind of precludes me. I can't say it's a good neighborhood, a bad neighborhood, might be considered steering. But what you can do, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, is you can come back during the evening, check the place out, check the crime report, check the plea, right? You can do some things yourself to satisfy yourself. This is an acceptable neighborhood to you. But I can't be telling you this is a good neighborhood or, oh, this is a bad neighborhood, I would not live here. No, I throw it back to the law, right? And I say, hey, there's a federal law that kind of precludes me from commenting. So keep that in mind. You'll get that question. Think of me when you do. I mean, I got it numerous times, right? Because people want to know. You're the local expert, right? They're going to ask you that. And again, they can satisfy themselves. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's very common. And you never know, if that person possibly could be a tester, and then we have an issue. All right. Kind of touched upon fair housing. Let's talk a little bit about legal compliance. So legal compliance has to do with three things. So if you've just gotten your license and it's your first renewal, post licensing education. Come on, state of Florida, I already passed the test. Now I got to take another test. I got to take another whatever 40-hour course to keep my license. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So your first renewal, right, you're going to take that post-licensing course, and you're going to get that into the state, and you are going to pay your renewal fee, $69, very inexpensive, and you're going to make sure your license has been updated. This past cycle, like they gave us, the cycles are March 31st and September 30th. So the September 30th cycle, they extended because of some inclement weather, I think to October 25th. And I probably had 7 or 8 agents that licenses went into null and void. Null and void. That's, your first, if you don't take that post-licensing education, they take your license away. It's like you never had it. Your license is now null and void. And trust me, it is a pain to get it out of that status. You're shut down. You're unable to do business anymore. You're not a real estate agent. You're unlicensed. And then the other one is your second renewal, right? And your renewals after that. It's not as daunting. 16 hours of continuing education, right? Again, you're going to make sure the certificate got to the state, right? You're going to make sure you paid your renewal fee, and you're going to make sure your license is still current. Because again, if your license falls into involuntary, inactive, again, you are no longer able to do business. You are unlicensed. We don't want that. You don't want that. You're shut down. And then the third is if you move, right? If you move. So stay on top of your license, stay on top of your renewal, get that. I use a school called Gold Coast Real Estate School. Gold Coast Real Estate School. They're awesome, very inexpensive. I think it's like $39. And guess what? You can do it all online. And when you do it online, pretty much open book, right? My continuing education is supposed to take 16 hours. I was able to bang it out in about 3 hours. So you can save yourself some time, do it online, get it out of the way, stay on top of your license. All right. Next one, showing protocol, your listings, right? Again, you're going to coordinate with your seller, right? How am I going to get people through? How am I going to get people to take a look? What do we need to do? Obviously, if the place is vacant, it's easy. Kind of show and go, right? Easy to show, right? Again, you're going to confirm, but sometimes places, most times they're occupied. I would have clients like what I used to do. I would call my seller. Hey, I've got a request for showing. They want to come by. I'd call them early in the day. They want to come by tonight at 6 p.m. And they'd say, Phil, that's when Junior does his homework. Can they come tomorrow? What I learned is very, very few buyers will come tomorrow. If you cannot accommodate them, because again, they're out on a tour, right? They're seeing multiple houses. Most times they don't come back. You've lost that opportunity. You never know. Maybe that was the one that would have purchased that home, right? So again, if there's a tenant, you got to confirm with the tenant. Usually you need 24 hours. Sometimes tenants can be brutal, making it difficult to show. I used to do not really an open house, but I would do like a group showing to make it easy on the tenant, right? 10 a.m. on Saturday, everybody needs to be here. If they want to take a look, the tenant has given us the green light, right? So it's not really an open house. It's more like a group showing, again, to accommodate that tenant. Tenants are, they know they're going to be displaced potentially, right? So they make it hard. So again, coordinate, make sure your seller knows every showing is important. Try to get those people through. All right. So, every year, a little bit, maybe every 9 months, we do some group meetings, right? Phil, either does a lunch and learn or cocktail hour, meet all the agents, have some community, right? And so this year on our first one, we go all over the state. We'll go Sarasota, Spring Hill, Orlando, Miami, right? So we pretty much go hit all the places where our agents are, and it's fun and it's enjoyable. We all have a good time. So this year for our first event, I asked our attorney if she could come and speak and what she's seeing out there. What is she seeing that are getting agents in trouble? All right, so here are a few things she talked about. Your listing. And one of the words she used was new, right? New. What does new mean? Like new roof, new appliances, new this, new that. What does new mean? Is it brand new? Is it 2 years old? Usually we do it in the spring. Down where you are, Key, in Sarasota, we do it at Seasons at UTC. So it'll be coming up probably in another, it's a lot of work to coordinate it all, but probably in the next, maybe 2-3 months, we'll kind of kick those off again. Absolutely. Thank you. So, again, so we want to be careful because what she said is sometimes, people get mad and, when they get mad, they tend to blame us and, maybe they get an attorney involved and, that word new, right, kind of gets, now we're accused of false advertising. So, we want to be careful with that. We want to really choose our words carefully. Those realtor remarks, those public remarks, oftentimes there's, some puffery, right? We just want to, make it factual. Brand new, if it is brand new, fine. But the word new is tricky, right? Because if it's brand new, fine. But what does that mean? It's 6 months old, a year old, 2 years old? I don't know. That's a word potentially that can get us in trouble. And she's seen that happen. All right. She also talked about unprofessional behavior. Unprofessional behavior amongst agents. Meaning, there's a problem and then the two agents are going back and forth and they're dropping the F-bomb and they're like totally out there and they're really bad and, they're just, it's bad, right? Bad behavior, unprofessional. And then if, there's a problem and it can't get resolved, then it goes to a trial with a jury and all that bad behavior comes out. And a lot of times how they decide is kind of who they like. So you don't want to use that unprofessional behavior. You want to avoid it. Walk away. I'm a very competitive guy and, like there are people out there, they have to get the last word in. And, when I was younger, like I kind of maybe was like that. Now I just step back. I take a breath. I don't engage. We see it. We have the Dalton Wade Facebook group. Right. And we'll see agents from the brokerage going at it with each other. Again, unprofessional. There is no need for that. Do not engage in that type of behavior. And then the last thing she mentioned are your text messages, right? Texting. Texting is kind of the default way, the default way realtors communicate. And again, then there's a problem. Then there's an issue. All right, sounds good, Maria. We'll let you right back in. Absolutely. Hop back in. Hopefully it'll fix itself. Here's the issue, Kia. Not so much whether it was done, yes, absolutely. But again, it's around permitting, right? Permitting. So to pull a permit, That has to be done by a licensed professional, plumber, electrician, general contractor, right? And then where the problem becomes is when that person isn't licensed, right? And they didn't pull permits. Why do people not pull permits? Cheap, right? They want to save money. But here's the problem. The problem then becomes the work wasn't permitted. And again, that's fine. Yes, so only, any electrical, any plumbing, roofing, AC, windows, those typically all require a permit. The problem is not so much when you're the listing agent, because again, if you're the listing agent, hopefully you're going to, have we'll talk about this, in a couple slides, the seller's disclosure. So again, you're going to complete the seller's disclosure. And then, there's a section that asks about, permitting. And if they answered, yeah, there's some unpermitted work, hey, you've done your job. You've disclosed that. Then it's up to the buyer and the buyer's agent to determine what to do with that. It's all about telling people. We always want to over disclose. Because again, when we don't do that, people come back to us and then they complain. So again, permitting is a very kind of, it's a weird thing. Some title companies, like we have Turner Title, which Dalton Wade owns. So they actually do a permit search. What are they looking for? Open permits, expired permits. And they will tell you that. You will know that. However, many title companies don't do that. And then all of a sudden, the seller owns the house and then there's a problem. The county or the city comes to them and says, hey, there's unpermitted work here, or there's expired or abandoned permits, right? And then, or they go to sell the house. You were their buyer's agents and now they want you to be their listing agent, and come to find out, yeah, you let them buy a house with expired or abandoned permits and they never knew it and they're still there. Now, again, as long as they know that, it's no big deal. It's when people don't know things, right? They always want to blame somebody else. So again, it's kind of that questionable area. So again, permits, it's kind of like the wild, wild west out there to a certain extent. So just be careful around that, but that's a very good question. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about, when you're showing a home. We touched upon this a little bit last night. Every appointment confirmed, every appointment you're there, right? And again, I had a client, her name was Michelle. She was a flipper. I probably bought her maybe 4 or 5 houses here in Florida. When she would flip them, I would end up selling them for her. But she had this thing, right? No hospitals, no schools, no cemeteries. I thought it was very odd, but that was her thing. Right? So if we drove up to a home that we were going to take a look at and she could see a hospital, she could see a cemetery, or she could see a school, we weren't even going in. It's immediately off the list. And we would blow it off. But I would call the listing agent and tell them, hey, we've had a problem. We're not coming. I want to let you know, right? Because what's going to happen is this. That seller is going to know nobody came through. They're going to know that, and they're going to give their listing agent a wrath of what. And sometimes you can be the listing agent, and you don't want that wrath. We get blamed for that buyer's agent's bad behavior, right? So if you're not going, maybe you take them out, and the first house you show them, hey, I want to make an offer on that. I don't want to see any other houses. That can happen. Call and let them know you are not coming. Don't just disregard them, because they're going to hear it from their client and it is not professional. So we always got to be there. We always have to, confirm our appointments. And if, we schedule something and then we don't show, we definitely want to let the listing agent know. Again, just professional courtesy. But sometimes that's lacking out there, and sometimes it can bite us. So don't be that agent. All right, open houses. We talked a little bit about this on Monday night. We're going to hit it on it again. A great way, to meet clients. I use that. I call it the F word. A little bit of humor there, right? For free. I don't know if you guys have met Claren. Kind of one of my right-hand ladies here at Dalton Wade. She was Dalton Wade agent, I think, number 7. We're close to 1,500 agents now. I met her at an open house, her and her husband. We ended up selling them a home, right? And she's kind of been here ever since. They've moved out of the area. Her husband's in the Coast Guard, so they've been stationed a few different places. But, she's kind of in support, admin. She's awesome, very knowledgeable, conducts some great trainings. So, again, it's a really great opportunity. And as you develop as a real estate agent, you want to get good, right? You want to get good at conducting an open house. You want to have a process, right? Get there early, have a lot of signage, meet and greet. And then, my thing was meet and greet. I used to sign everybody in on, my laptop or my iPad, right? Not signing them in on a piece of paper. I told that story. I'll tell it again in case anybody missed it on Monday. But, there was a broker, back when I worked in Massachusetts, I'd be doing open houses, and she stopped in to my open houses a couple times trying to recruit me. I didn't end up going, but then, when I came to Florida, this is probably before COVID, I'm like, oh, I'm the broker now. I'm going to go to open houses and I'm going to recruit agents. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to meet agents. I went to 50 open houses over like a 3-month period. You know how many agents I recruited? None. 0. It didn't work. It wasn't effective. But what I learned is that there are agents out there, they are clueless. I used to go, like, I'd see it was scheduled at 1, right? I'd be there at 1, they're late. I go in, and sometimes, they're dressed like they just came off the beach, or they're in shorts, flip-flops, cutoffs, t-shirt, tank tops, right? They do not look like a professional individual, right? Every time we meet somebody, it is an opportunity to help them. How do people select an agent? We talk about, 75% of first-time home buyers work with the first agent they connect with, they bond with, right? 25% are referred to somebody, but the vast majority don't have an agent, don't have a referral, and guess what? They go to open houses because that's their only access to properties. And then they start with open houses, and then as they get more serious, they engage an agent. I mentioned I had a 4%, right, conversion, meaning 25 people came through my open house, 1 became my client on the buyer side. But it was all very systematic how I did it, right? I'm there early. I have a lot of signage. I'm meeting. I'm trying to get them to bond with me, connect with me. That's what this business is. You're not selling real estate. You're really not. You're selling yourself, right? Not everybody we're going to bond with, but the more people we come in contact with, the more opportunities we have, right? Maybe you'll have a 7% conversion rate. But the more people you meet, the better chance you are, of picking. And again, I'm going to use my F word again, right? You get to meet people for free, right? Free leads. And those are the best at Dalton Wade because, you're keeping, if not all the commission, very, very close to it. So work those open houses, be out there, get good at doing them. All right, RESPA. Anybody know what RESPA stands for? Anybody know what RESPA has to do with? It is not truth in lending. I don't know why people type that in, but they do. Anybody have any idea? RESPA, it's a federal law. It is called the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. Federal law, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. And it has to basically do with kickbacks. Kickbacks. Who might kick us back money? Lenders, title companies. Those are the primary two. Inspectors, they don't have enough margin in their deal to really be able to kick back money to an agent. But a lender can be making, on a loan, 2.5 points, right? So it's a $600,000 loan. They're getting $12,000 to $15,000. So they have margin. They have some money to say, hey, you send me a buyer, I'm going to give you $500 under the table. 500, 100-dollar bills, gift card to Home Depot for $500, whatever, under the table. Kickback. Illegal. Here's what's not illegal. Referrals. Why would you refer somebody primarily to your lender? We talked a little bit about this last night. Lenders can cause us a lot of problems. I often say, hey, if you're working with a lender and you don't know them, you've never worked with them before, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how they're going to perform, and it can mess you up. Mess your whole deal up. Cause your deal not to close because they didn't do a good job. You never know what that seller's doing, what that listing agent's doing. A good listing agent has backup offers. Maybe they have a backup offer higher than your offer, and they're cash. And your lender can't get it done in 30 days. And now you have to ask for an extension, and the seller tells you, have a nice day. See you later. You're out. And they go to that cash buyer. Again, we talked a little bit about who are the bad lenders, who are the lenders that historically have not delivered in a timely manner. Number one on my list is Bank of America, right? I mean, it's a great bank, but, lending, maybe mortgage lending, maybe not a priority. It gets busy. They don't hire more people. They don't hire more underwriters, more processors. They just make people wait. And sometimes that is a problem. The closing date isn't a suggestion like, oh, let's hope we can close by this date. No, it is a firm date that needs to be adhered to. We talked a little bit last night. We'll hit on it again. How do you get your client to your lender? Again, we negotiate, right? We're always suggesting, and whenever we suggest something, whenever we mention something to our client, the last words out of our mouth is, it's up to you, right? So maybe that, you've met that new buyer, you met them at an open house, and you ask them, hey, are you pre-approved? And they say yes, and then they show you their pre-approval, and it's Bank of America, and your job just got all that much harder. So you might suggest, Bank of America, maybe they don't have the best reputation out there. It's going to make it a little bit harder for us to get our offer accepted. There's a lot of knowledgeable listing agents. You're not, there's no one for them to talk to. Even the buyer's agent, they don't talk to you at Bank of America. There's no one to talk to. They only talk to the client. So maybe you suggest, hey, maybe you want to talk to my lender. They get it done every single time on time, right? Because again, if the lender can't get it done on time, there's no guarantee you're going to get an extension from the seller. With me and lenders, I mean, one strike, one mess up, I'm done. I don't want to ever work with you again. Never even call me again. You've caused me stress. I don't need stress. I work hard. I want to do a great job for my clients, my agents, right? But again, sometimes there's like outside parties that mess us up. I mean, we did everything great. We worked so hard, and then the lender did us wrong in the end. That's a problem. So we always want to try to stack the deck in our favor as best we can. Sometimes we can't. So say you're at an open house and you meet somebody and you really connect, and like you say, hey, would you like to look at some properties with me? And they say yes. And then you kind of say, hey, let's go out on Tuesday. And they say, that's great, we'll do it. You ask them, hey, if you see any properties, send them to me. I'll do some research, and, we'll put together a 5 or 6, home tour, and, we'll take a look. And then you ask them like, oh, are you pre-approved? Are you pre-approved? And they say, no, not yet. Do you still take them out? They're not pre-approved. Would you take them out and show them properties without them being pre-approved? It's a yes or no answer. You will run into this situation. I guarantee you. What do you say? All right, we got a couple people typing. Kia says he would take them to see one only. You mean one time out or one property? One property. Okay, that may be a little conservative. My thing, I would take them out on one tour. James says no. James gave us the no. A lot of times people say no. Here's what I see. I'm very analytical and I let the data tell me what to do, right? So if I took 5 people out that weren't pre-approved, guess what? I got 4 of them done. I closed them and I got them pre-approved. And 1 couldn't be pre-approved. A lot of times agents are taught, don't take them out. That's a waste of time. Play the numbers, play the odds, come up with your own odds. But for me, it was 4 out of 5. So James, unfortunately, James got no deals. I got 4 deals. Take them out. Take them out on one tour, get to know them. And here's what, you have a much higher probability of getting them to your lender. Then you're totally in control, because you know your lender does a great job. They deliver on time every time. You need that strong lender by your side. It's very helpful. All right. Buyer broker agreement. Buyer broker agreement. Everybody know what that is? So when we have a listing, we have a listing agreement. We have a listing agreement, right? And we have a contract with that seller that if we sell his property, we are going to earn a commission. Sometimes we work with buyers, we don't have anything. We don't have anything. So I don't know if, everybody's kind of been paying, and we'll talk a little bit more when we get to antitrust, but, now, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of confusion out there about buyer agent commissions, who pays them. We don't know where this is ultimately going to go. It could go the way of, there could be what's called decoupling. This is possible. Hopefully it won't happen. It could. Decoupling the seller and the buyer, meaning the seller pays a commission and then the buyer has to pay their own commission. That's going to be very difficult. Now, again, NAR finally, due to an incredible amount of pressure, has changed their rules. So there used to be what is called the mandatory offer of compensation. That is one of the key things around the lawsuits swirling around the real estate profession and NAR particularly. So what previously was out there is there had to be an offer of compensation made to that buyer's agent. It could be $1. It could be $1. But it had to be something. Probably in the last month, 2 months, they've done away with that. So now it's potential to see listings in the MLS where they're offering zero to the buyer's agent. So who's going to pay us? Who's going to pay us? Well, in that case, the buyer is going to pay us, right? That's why we need that buyer broker agreement, right? It's a commitment from them that they are going to work with us. Buyers can work with whoever they want. You could have shown them 40 properties. I had an agent, was out showing them ready to make an offer. And then all of a sudden, as a young lady, her father says, you're not using him, you're using my realtor. My guy's kicked out. Got nothing. That couldn't have been possible if he had gotten that buyer broker agreement, right? So there's going to be a lot more need for that buyer broker agreement, right? So the buyer broker agreement, it does. It does, Kia. And it's basically whatever you decide. It can be 2%, 2.5%, 3%, meaning that's what you're going to be paid as the buyer's agent, right? And again, if there's an offer in the MLS, right, that is equal to or exceeds what you've agreed to, then the buyer pays nothing. It's only when, maybe your agreement is 2.5%, right? And the listing is only offering 2%, the buyer owes you that 0.5%. They're going to pay that difference. Again, so it's all how you present this, right? It's all how you present, right? So probably about a month ago, we actually wrote a blog article, up on the Join Dalton Wade website, there's a tab called collateral, right? There's a buyer presentation you can download. And again, you want to take your buyer through that. We need now, again, because of what's going on with NAR, we need more disclosure. We need to tell people exactly, like there is no free money anymore, right? A buyer's agent is very important. I would never want to buy a house without a buyer's agent. It's a bad deal potentially for that buyer, right? So you got to explain to them your value. You got to explain to them how you're going to help them, how you're worth that 2.5% commission, right? So you want to communicate that to them. And then maybe as part of your buyer, your buyer, your buyer presentation, you're going to ask for that buyer broker agreement. Maybe not. Maybe you feel like I never used one. I'm like, if they don't want to work with me, that's their problem. But did I get burned? Did I have people I work with that then went somewhere else and I got zero? Yeah, it happened. But I kind of think of it like this. I equate it to dating, right? Dating, sometimes I'm married, so I don't go on dates. But, back when I was dating, right? Like you go on a date and like, should we have them sign the buyer agreement? No, probably not. That would be too aggressive, in my opinion. Again, you want to try things. You want to see what works, James, right? But for me, I would not do that, right? I want to get to know them. Maybe I take them out once, maybe then I do that buyer consultation with them, kind of explain to them, you want to test this out. We work with multiple buyers, see what works, see what resonates, see what's best for you. I know agents, they will not take somebody out, without it. Others will get it later. There's no right or wrong answer, but you are more protected if you have it. You are more protected if you have it. But, kind of going back to the dating story. So you go on that first date, right? That's the first time you're meeting that buyer, right? First date. And then it's going well and you're connecting and, it's good and there's some chemistry. And then you ask them to marry you and they think you're crazy. And that's the end of it. That's the risk with the buyer broker agreement, that somebody doesn't want to sign it. They don't understand it. So you got to do a really good job at presenting it. There's some salesmanship there. But again, there is no right or wrong answer. But more now, we are hearing we kind of need that buyer broker agreement, really more now than really ever. So we want to have that. Yeah, I think it is better. I mean, sometimes you may feel comfortable. You don't even need to ask for it, but again, I mean, we just want to communicate. It is certainly better. NAR is definitely suggesting, trying to get that. And one other thing, we're now prohibited from saying is, what buyer's agents used to say, hey, I'm free. I don't cost anything. Use me. The seller pays. Can't say that. There is a cost. Somebody's paying it, right? So it is, could be built into the price. The buyer's paying it indirectly. So we'll talk a little bit more about the antitrust, in a couple bullets. So again, kind of got off the RESPA subject a bit, right? So no kickbacks, but that's kind of where I weave in the thing about the buyer broker agreement, right? It is a personal choice as an agent, but we're hearing more and more, how important having it is. All right, FIRPTA. Let's talk a little bit about FIRPTA. So FIRPTA is the Foreign Investment in Real Estate Settlement Act. It has to do with foreign buyers. So if a foreign buyer owns a property, they are subject to FIRPTA, right? It is a withholding, right? It is not a tax. It is a withholding to make sure, Uncle Sam, right, gets their taxes. Because what can happen is, let's just say that Canadian buyer, we have a lot of those in Florida, they're selling their house, they bought it 15 years ago and they have a $400,000 gain on that property. And guess what? They take that and they never file a U.S. tax return. They get to keep all the $400,000 without having to pay any taxes on that gain. So the federal government finally got smart and they came up, and FIRPTA has been around for a while. They came up with a law called, FIRPTA, and it has to do with withholding money. And then it forces that seller to file a tax return. Now, if they didn't have a gain, they get a refund. It's like, when if you're receiving a paycheck and they withhold money, and then at the end of the year you file your tax return, and if you paid in too much, you get a refund. If you haven't paid enough, you owe them money. Kind of the same concept, right? So it's a withholding. Now, here's the thing. FIRPTA is a tax issue. We are not tax attorneys. We are not lawyers. We are not a CPA. So FIRPTA is not our bailiwick, right? We're gonna mention to the seller, right? You have a foreign seller, right? That FIRPTA is going to apply, and that they need to speak to a tax professional to figure out what their obligations are under FIRPTA. Even title companies, they don't get involved with that. They send everything out to an expert. So you want to be aware of that. Again, where we can get in trouble as agents is when we start moving out of our lane, right? We start advising people, on things we have no knowledge of, no basis. We're not a tax lawyer. We're not an accountant. We're not a CPA. FIRPTA is for them, right? We advise, we tell, we notify, but we do not advise. So just heads up on FIRPTA. Antitrust. Let's talk a little bit about that. That is a hotbed right now. NAR, they've been sued and they lost, and the judgments are large. And now there's a whole bunch of other actions suing other brokerages, and it's getting messy out there, right? And we'll see how it all shakes out. But again, we want to make sure. So commissions, right? Commissions are negotiable. Right? What the federal government and these plaintiff attorneys are alleging is that there is collusion, there is a conspiracy to charge people more for the benefit of realtors. It's probably going to go to appeal. NAR lost the first case. Now it's open with a 7-person jury. If you want more information, I did a YouTube video on it, pretty knowledgeable around the subject. I'll, maybe send everybody the link in the morning, but, read up on it. It's important. Again, it's all about communicating. It's all about explaining your value, both as a listing agent and as a buyer's agent. Like, we work hard. We do. We bring a lot of value. We want to communicate that value. Would I want to be a buyer based on what I've learned in Florida without an agent? Absolutely not. I've seen buyers not represented get taken to the cleaners, way overpay. They didn't have anybody helping them. So again, we want to communicate. We want to use that buyer presentation. We want to be more open. We want to express our value. We want to communicate our value. And if we do a good job at that, people will continue to use us. So you want to have that buyer presentation. Again, it's all about explaining what we do. People don't know. People don't know. If you went into Starbucks and, we'll pick on millennials, right? And you went up to 10 millennials and you said, what's a buyer's agent in real estate? I'm guaranteeing you 9 out of 10 have no clue. No clue. Because they're uneducated. It's not their fault. The real estate industry, again, I have my own suspicions. I'm personally not a fan of NAR, but I'm forced to use them. I'm forced to be part of them in Florida, right? I don't know what value they provide. Not a lot to me, but, again, like I can, take my whole brokerage out of NAR, and I can still have MLS, but then I can't have any of the state of Florida realtor forms. I'm not assured of getting a commission, right? NAR protects us on that. There's the legal hotline. We're not able to use the lockbox system. So there are some good things, right? But, in certain states, agents could sort the listings by commission paid. That was a problem. If you weren't part of NAR and the Florida Realtors Association, you can't use the lockbox system. So they've done some things. It's hard to know where this is going to go. We'll have to see. It's going to take a while to play out. For you as an agent, keep your head down, keep working, don't worry about it, but get out there and communicate your value. Communicate your value to your clients. And if you do a good job at that, you will not have any issues. All right. Financing contingency. It's on here again. We talked about that last night. I have to mention again because it drives me crazy when I get that call from that agent and there's an escrow dispute. And the first thing I ask them is, and it's always around, not always, but the vast majority of times it's around the lender didn't get it done. And now there's a problem. Every lender, like I said last night, will tell you they can do it. They're going to get this closed until they can't. There are some bad lenders out there. I can, my head accountant now, his name is Miles. Great guys, worked here a long time with me, started as a Dalton Wade agent, really almost in the beginning. And, he was still doing some deals and he was kind of my compliance guy when we were much smaller. And we're in the office and I'm listening to him and he's got a deal and the lender's not getting it done. And I'm hearing him. And the issue is the guy's, his client's employment verification. So they can verify where he works now, but they can't verify his previous employment. I'm like, Miles, ask him for an exception. So he goes, hey, do you think we could get an exception on that? Guess what? They got the exception. That lender should have known to ask that. He didn't even know to do that. That's what we're dealing with out there sometimes. Just people that just aren't that good. And then we get stuck using them, right? And it causes us havoc. So again, we want to be on top of that financing contingency date, right? Once that date expires, and if your client doesn't get the loan, they are not getting their deposit back. Yeah, I mean, that's hard to do. You could do that, but again, it always comes down, usually they're the same. You're going to close in 30 days. The default on the financing contingency is 30 days. You kind of back it right up to the closing date. And then if they close, everything is good. But it's when they can't close, you have to ask for an extension. This is how it's going to go, James. You're going to ask the listing agent for an extension for both the closing date and the financing contingency date. And maybe you get, an unexperienced listing agent and they have their client sign it, you are good. But here's what happens. I'm the listing agent, you send it to me and I say, hey, we'll give you 2 more weeks to close, but you've had 30 days to get that loan. If you can't get it, next 2 weeks, your client's not entitled to get their deposit back. Are you good with that? So now the financing contingency is going to expire. The closing date is extended. And then the buyer's agent sends the addendum to the client. There is no mention, there is no discussion that the financing contingency is gone right? And they just stick the addendum in front of them and they sign it. And then guess what? They don't get the loan. And then they're like, okay, we want our deposit back. We were denied. What should have happened in that situation was a conversation with the client saying, hey, look, unfortunately, they're not willing to extend the financing contingency. We got two choices. We can go naked, meaning no financing contingency. And if you don't get that loan, you're not getting that, you're not entitled to get your deposit back, or we can cancel. We can cancel. And I can get your deposit back now because you're not approved, and I can get your deposit back. What do you want to do? And I think what happens is agents don't want to have that conversation because they're afraid of what they're going to hear, which is cancel. All that work, all that time. You're right at the end, and then the lender did you wrong. I see this all the time. I mean, it's unbelievable. It happens a couple times, 3 times a month. Experienced agents. No, not in the initial offer. Like in the initial offer, you're going to have, let's just say the lender has said to you, yep, James, we can get this done in 30 days. So you have a 30-day closing date and a 30-day financing contingency. Maybe they need 45 days. That's not as good, right? The listing agent's not going to like that because any good lender can get it done in 30 days. In the event it's 45 days and the financing contingency is 45 days, the closing is 45 days. But let's just go back to 30 days for the closing, 30 days for the financing contingency. You're all good up until day 30 or day 29. And you're like, hey, to me, it's clear to close. That's what I want. CTC, clear to close. I want that lender to tell me we are clear, everything is done. It's when they have conditions, exceptions. You have a conditional approval. They're not really approved. They're conditionally approved, but then if those conditions don't pan out, they don't get the loan. And if they don't have that financing contingency in place, they're not entitled to get their deposit back. So you're going to ask for an extension of both the closing date and the financing contingency date. If the listing agent says no, we'll extend the closing date, but not the financing contingency date. You go back to your client and say, hey, look, they're willing to give us 2 more weeks, but if we don't close at that time, you're not entitled to get your deposit back. Do you want to move forward or do you want to cancel? And they're going to tell you what they want to do. And again, if they want to move forward and risk their deposit themselves, great, no issue. The problem is when they don't know it and they don't get the loan and they want the deposit back. That's where it comes up. I told that story last night where I had an agent and he says to me, oh, the other 2 times it always closed. Well, this time it didn't close. Trust me, for whatever reason, this whole financing contingency thing is the number one issue agents seem to struggle with. That's why we've spent, a fair amount of time on it. All right. I know James is typing. I'll wait to see his question, then I'll ask. Okay, thank you. All right, appraisal contingency. Let's talk about that. So appraisal contingency means the property has to appraise. So FHA, VA, financing, automatic appraisal contingency. Built in, there's an addendum in Florida. It's called the FHA VA addendum, automatically built into that. The property has to appraise for the purchase price. What if it doesn't? Then what happens? A couple things. One, the buyer can cancel. They have the right to walk away. It didn't appraise. They get their deposit back. Let's use VA. The house is $400,000 and it appraises at $390,000. There's a $10,000 shortfall. Now what do? The buyer can cancel, or maybe there's another negotiation. Maybe the seller comes down $5,000 and the buyer says, I'll kick in $5,000. The mortgage company will lend me $390,000. I'll put $5,000 of my own funds in. The seller came down to $395,000. It all works. Maybe the agent's kicking some money. Maybe it was a 6% commission, 3 and 3. There's $12,000 of commission. Each agent, kicks in $2,500, and the seller and buyer kick in $2,500, all to make it work. Right? You're trying to make it work. You're trying to keep it going. And then on conventional financing, there is no automatic appraisal contingency. It has to be added as an addendum. Appraisal contingencies are negative to the seller. So if you're representing the seller and they're a conventional buyer and they want to have an appraisal contingency, you want to try to negotiate that away. Why? An appraisal is just one person's opinion. First time I experienced this, it's many years ago, but I have the listing, $279. I'm the listing agent, and the property appraises at $249. Like, wow, way off. Used bad comps. Didn't like me. I don't know why he did that. But the buyer asked me, like, what can I do? So let me just step back. So FHA VA, right? You have an FHA VA financing, right? That appraisal stays with that home for 6 months. So there is really no going to another lender, right? Because they're going to use the same appraisal that was used initially. Conventional, it works a little differently. The buyer can reapply with a different lender, right, and have a new appraisal. And that's what happened in my case, right? He goes, what do I do? I'm like, apply with my lender. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I sent them to my lender. Not that she had anything to do with it. Same house, 2 weeks later, $289, $40,000 difference. Again, do I want my deal, if I'm the listing agent, to be contingent on something like that? Absolutely not. So I'm going to try very hard, right, as the listing agent to negotiate that appraisal contingency with a conventional buyer out of there. Back when prices were going up, there was a thing called the gap appraisal. It's still out there, but we don't hear about it as much. The gap appraisal. So again, what that is so, there's a nice form. It's the appraisal contingency form. So basically you say the property, there's an amount you put in. Let's use that $400,000. So, appraisers look at past data. During COVID, prices were going up very quickly. So nothing was appraising out, and buyers knew it in advance. So what they might do is what's called a gap appraisal, meaning they put in the form, the property has to appraise, let's just say at $375, even though it's under agreement for $400. As long as it appraises at $375, the buyer's going to move forward. The buyer's going to make up that shortfall. Lenders lend the less of the appraised value or the purchase price. But if it appraises low, $375, the buyer's going to make up the difference, right? They're going to bring that extra cash and they're going to close. If it appraises lower than $375, maybe there's a renegotiation or maybe they walk away. We also saw 3 or 4 of these where in the additional terms, the 2 agents, the Dalton Wade agent and whether it was the listing agent or the buyer's agent, but the 2 agents together in their infinite wisdom write in the additional terms. House is under agreement for $300,000. They write in the additional terms, home to sell for $15,000 above appraised value. House to sell for $15,000 above appraised value, and it's under agreement for $300,000. Then the appraisal comes in at $265. Now the buyer wants to buy it for $280, and the seller's like, no way. And then it's a shit show caused by the agents. So the takeaway is this: you never want to value what somebody is going to pay based on the appraisal, because you have no idea where that number is going to come in at. So never do that. It is never the appraised value plus some amount. That is a recipe for a disaster. All right. Everybody good with the appraisal contingency? It's, again, important, works a little differently depending on, the type of financing. All right. Lead paint disclosure. So, where I was initially trained up in Boston, right? I don't know, 95% of the houses are all built before 1978. Pretty much all the transaction, there's a lead paint disclosure, right? The lead paint, it's a law. It's, again, a federal law. It was, that there is to be no child under the age of 5 in a home that has lead paint. Are there lead paint police checking this? No, there are not. There are not. But, if a child has a learning disability, the first thing they do is they test that kid for lead poisoning. Lead poisoning is terrible, terrible. This is a very easy thing to comply with. So if you're the listing agent, right, and that house is built before 1978, you are going to give your client the lead paint pamphlet telling them, the seller, what their responsibilities are regarding lead paint, right? You're going to give them that pamphlet, and then there's a form. They're going to complete that form, and you and the seller are going to sign it. And then you're going to scan it into the MLS, right? You're going to attach it to your listing. And when the buyer puts in an offer, they're going to complete it. We are compliant. We are perfect. If the buyer signs the lead paint disclosure before the seller, it's a $3,000 fine. If there is no lead paint, who knows what's going to happen, right? Especially if there's a problem down the road. So again, sometimes we have to worry about the other agent. If you're the buyer's agent and the listing agent, that form isn't there. I think I told this story the other night, where the Dalton Wade agent called me, he had taken the training. He goes, there's no lead paint, and she wants me to complete it. This is the listing agent. She doesn't know what she's doing. Maybe she's part-time, maybe she's who knows? Probably didn't take my training, right? So she's causing herself, her broker, and me and my agent liability that we don't need. That is so easy to comply with. The seller completes it. Why does the seller have to complete it first? Because they have to tell what they know about lead paint in their home. Most people sign no knowledge. They don't know anything about it. They don't know whether there's lead paint or not. Typically not an issue if there are no children, but if you have a child under the age of 5 that's going to be living there, they're not supposed to be in that house if it has lead paint. Responsible parents will actually do a lead paint test and see. Maybe there isn't any lead paint. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. Maybe the house is full of lead paint. Who knows? Our job is compliance. Our job is to fill the forms out correctly, have it all signed by the right people, right? I mean, you have to sign it on both sides if you're the listing agent or if you're the buyer's agent. So you got to know about lead paint. There are houses out there in Florida, probably, I don't know what percentage, it's much less than up north, but still some. So you want to get that right. It's important. All right, seller's property disclosure. So here's the thing. You mean the seller's disclosure, Andres? Not replacing the, no, it doesn't. They are separate. The lead paint disclosure is mandatory. The seller's disclosure is not. But here is what is mandatory for a seller. Any non-visible, right, can't see it. The buyer can't see it. Material, like if it's something that's a defect and it's $100, who really cares? So material, right? It's a significant amount of money. Non-visible material defect needs to be disclosed. If you're the agent and you know of that defect and you don't disclose it, we are equally liable. It's like stealing. There's something wrong with that property that nobody can see, but the seller knows of it and they don't tell anybody and they hide it. And they're basically ripping off the buyer. Who does stuff like that? I'll tell you who. Flippers, wholesalers. You know, remember we talked about assigning, right? Flippers, wholesalers, investors. Those are the guys you got to be worried about. They don't care. They'll steal from your client. Again, there's always a possibility that a homeowner might not be honest, but it's much, much, much smaller than this particular group. I call that group, flippers, wholesalers, investors, the underbelly of real estate. I mean, they're out there. They do a lot of buying and selling, but they do it, and sometimes, you know, you'll see. So the seller's property disclosure is not a requirement. What is a requirement is disclosing any material non-visible defects. Twice the seller will attest that there aren't any. Once when he signs the listing agreement and once when he signs the purchase contract. He will say that. You know, I felt really bad for her. You know, this guy, she had worked hard to get this listing. She was a newer agent, and the guy has continually had a rodent problem, continual over the years. And rats, right? House has been infested with rats. You know, they have the pest control, they come back, and he doesn't want to disclose it. Oh, no one's going to care. Yeah, they're going to care. You're a dirtball. You are a dirtball. You want to sell somebody a house that has a problem. They're all the same group. You know, I can give you numerous stars. And again, sometimes it's just dumb agents, dumb listing agents. We had one, this was a few years ago. If you look, it was a bank-owned property, and the guy who bought it, he had an agent, and they did a rehab. And then on that listing, the bank-owned property, the listing agent puts right in the realtor remarks, mitigated sinkhole. Now, home with a mitigated sinkhole probably is going to be worth, that's a defect. It's probably going to be worth less than a house that doesn't have that issue. So it's disclosed when they buy it, and then when they go to sell it, never mentioned. Never mentioned. That listing agent, I just can't tolerate people like that. They're trying to rip people off. Thank God the home inspector found it, and the client walked away. Had another one. Beautiful townhouse, and then there's a Florida room, a nice Florida room. It's a really nice feature. You know, you go out of the living room into the Florida room. There's a light switch in the living room that turns on the lights, the fan. The tenant's possessions are, on the Florida room, and we get right to closing, and the survey comes in, and guess what? The Florida room is on somebody else's property, and we call up the survey company. We say, "Are you sure?" Oh, they go, "Yeah. The seller knows this. The seller knows this. We did the survey for him." And the listing agent, again, pretty certain he knew. Why do I say that? He doesn't mention anything about the Florida room. There are no photos of it. There's no mention of it in the write-up. It's like it doesn't exist, but it does exist. It does exist. That is not that is not cool. He knew it and he hid it. Dirtball, both the client and the agent. That's what you got to watch out for. Again, you want that strong inspector. If I stress anything, having good professionals around you, great inspector, great lender, great title company, right? Makes your job easier. I'll give you one more story, and then we'll move on. But again, so I don't know if any of you are up in the Clearwater area. So there's a place there called Top of the World, and it's got like 5,000 condos. It's huge, and it's been around a long time. And each one of them is a separate condo association. And my client, very, very, they're like 100,000, or at least they're probably double that now. This is several years ago, and basically, she likes the unit because it has a washer dryer hookup in the unit, and we go under agreement. And then another one of my agents, Leroy, he's done, quite a bit of business in that complex. So I'm like, hey, can you send me the condo docs? He goes, absolutely. He goes, there's a management interview. I go, yeah, we've scheduled that. We're ready. We're good. He goes, they asked one question. I go, what's that? Is there a washer dryer hookup in the unit? They're all illegal. They're all illegal. I got so mad. Like call the listing agent. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're trying to sell something. You're not disclosing that that's illegal. He knew it. He has the audacity to say to me, it was put in by a plumber. The one thing she keyed off of, right? Say she bought it. They would have made her rip that out. Problem. Disclose, over disclose. The buyer will find out, and they will come back and they will be mad. If your seller doesn't want to disclose something and you think it needs to be disclosed, you need to call me, and we'll figure out if we even want to work with this person. It's not worth it. The liability is too much. All right, I've beaten that to death. So again, personally, I like all clients to fill out the seller's disclosure, right? It helps them identify any material, non-visible defects in their home. If there's no seller's disclosure, sometimes you'll see, a flipper. They'll have it, and there'll be a statement. They've never lived in the home. Are you kidding me? You've been there for the last 3 months, every day, rehabbing that property. You know everything about it, yet you're willing to say nothing. Worrisome. Higher probability, again, right? Flippers, wholesalers, investors, those are the guys that rip people off. Be careful of them. They hide stuff. I don't want to, get over dramatic here, but that's what I've seen. Not always. Some are very good. Some take a lot of pride in what they do and don't do stuff like that. But there's a group out there that, they cut corners. They don't tell things. It's all about the money. They have the house in an LLC. They close it down right after closing. It's tough to get at them. All right. Escrow account. Let's talk a little bit about that. So Dalton Wade does hold escrow for rentals. So if you have a rental, you're the leasing agent, we can hold escrow. We can hold the security deposits if you want. You never, ever, if you're leasing something, right, you never want the seller holding the deposits until after the property has been leased. You give the seller the money, then it doesn't lease, then you got to get the money back from them. Could be a problem, right? So we can hold money for escrow, right, for rentals, but we do not hold it for purchases. Purchases, it goes to either the title company or an escrow agent. All right, collecting funds, right? So you guys can never collect any money, ever. Everything has to go through the brokerage, right? The brokerage gets paid, and then I pay you. Had a situation a few years ago. I got a call from another broker, says we have a little problem. I'm like, oh, what's that? Your agent was working, and now we're working with this buyer, and the buyer gave your agent $700. Well, I'm like, oh, that's not good. Let me speak to him. I call him up. Yes, that happened. I'm like, again, you can't collect any money. He had to return the money. He had to give her the money back. All he had to do was have her pay Dalton Wade, and then we paid him. Can never collect any money. If there's a cancellation fee, if there's any money, all the money goes through the brokerage. All right. Forms and contracts, right? So again, Florida has a ton of forms, a couple different contracts, right? What we get to do is check the boxes and fill in the blanks. That is it. We do not cross things out. We do not change things. We do not add, language to the body of the contract. The only time we can write something in is in the additional terms, and we want to be very careful what we write in there. Attorneys, right, have a way of writing that everything is covered off. It's very clear, right? Real estate agents, not so much. Now all of a sudden there's a problem, there's a dispute, and then someone says to you, why did you do that? Why did you write that? You're not an attorney. Everything is good until it's not, right? So again, be very careful what you write in those additional terms. Try to make it as clear as possible. If you don't have to write anything in there, that is certainly better. All right, we hit upon this a little bit last night, the Dalton Wade buyer acknowledgement. It's a disclosure that tells buyers what we're doing and what they're responsible for. Actually, we're not really responsible for much. They are responsible for a lot. We want them to sign that every single time. It protects us. It helps us. That's why we have it. Because again, what happens is if there's a problem, and usually when there's a problem, it's a few $1,000, but it's still something, right? And they're complaining, and we don't want that. So again, a lot of times it's because they just don't want to accept responsibility. They want to blame somebody else, especially when it's around money. Oh, we told you that. We told you the taxes were going to change and that you needed to call, the appraiser's office to find out what the new tax rate was going to be, because that house has been homesteaded for the last 30 years. That was right in that Dalton Wade buyer's acknowledgement. You read that. You told us you did. Have a nice day. Right? It's there to protect us. So we always want that. Wire fraud disclosure. Let's talk a little bit about that. So not only wire fraud is, I don't want to say it's prevalent, but there are a lot of scammers out there. There are a lot of scammers. And what they do is they basically somehow find out who the title company is. Usually I've seen it around somebody and the lender being hacked, and then they find out who the title company is. Or maybe it's in the MLS, who knows how they get the information, and then they send the phishing email to the buyer, right? And if they wire those funds to the wrong party and they close out that bank account, that money is gone. That money is gone. So here's what I'd like you to do. So we have a separate wire fraud disclosure, and it's in the Dalton Wade buyer acknowledgement. But here's what happens. There is a lot to sign. So you send over the paperwork, right? And they're going click, 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 sign, and they're just banging through it, and they're reading nothing. They're not reading the wire fraud disclosure. They're just signing it. Have a 5-minute conversation with your buyer and tell them that their final payment has to be a wire to the title company, and they need to be 150% certain they are wiring those funds to the correct account. The criminals are slick. They really are. And you don't want your client to think of it. It's terrible, terrible. So you never want that to happen. So have that couple of minute conversation right when they're signing. Mention wire fraud to them. I've lost count, but we've had numerous clients thank the agent because they got the phishing email and then they weren't duped. All right, final walkthrough of the property. Again, we touched upon that a bit last night. We'll hit upon it again. Realtor 101. It is so basic. You're going to go there. It's joyous. It's the end. It's closing. Either that after that day, the next day, it's done. It's finished. Go there and make sure that property is being turned over to your client in good order. same condition it was when you viewed it, except for normal wear and tear. If there's any issues, maybe, the floors are damaged and the seller hid that with rugs, who knows? If there's any issue, call me and we have to figure out what we're going to do. Typically, we want to close, but maybe what we're going to do is ask the seller, to hold back some money, right, to fix whatever the issue is. We can still close, but we would definitely want to talk through that and make sure, because again, once it closes, it's over, and many people don't do the right thing. So you don't want to close, right, if there's any issue with that property, unless money is being held back to fix that issue, right? And then again, it's written something like, hey, if whatever the issue isn't corrected in 30 days, hold back money is, returned to the buyer, right? So then they can fix it. All right, compliance. So I have a whole compliance team, right? No worries, Marie. You can always watch the replay. You'll get a notification of that. A few more points so you can catch the end. You made it through most of it. We appreciate that. Have a great evening. Thank you so much. All right, compliance. So again, paperwork is important. We catch things, we find things that aren't signed, that aren't initialed, are signed by, somebody that's a corporation. Corporation can't sign, right? That's actually not a valid contract, right? Get your paperwork in. We want to pay you at closing. That is our goal. I can't pay you if I don't have your paperwork. That is my only leverage to get your paperwork. I could get a call tomorrow from Freck saying, send me the file. And I don't have the file because I don't have the paperwork. That's a problem. Compliance is important. It's simply it's all through .loop. You just, share it with us and we approve it, review it, get to know .loop. It's a great program, right? So we want to be compliant and we want that paperwork in and approved. All right, affiliated business disclosure. So Dalton Wade does own Turner Title. There's no obligation for you to use them, but we would love if you did, gave them a try. They're awesome. They do a great job, have some great tools. They'll do a great job for you, but we do have to have that disclosure. It has to be signed by every client. Sometimes people will say, oh, we're not using them. It really doesn't matter. The only way I can ensure compliance is to have everybody sign it. So again, it's just a form. Explain to your client, hey, it's more, compliance than anything else. No obligation to use Turner Title, but they will need to sign that. All right, clear cooperation. Clear cooperation is a NAR rule that came out a few years ago, and it has to do with, so before clear cooperation, again, I'll call them despicable agents. That's a good word. Despicable agents. What they used to do, right? They would put the listing in Zillow and they'd put a sign out in front of the house and they would say, coming soon, coming soon. And why they did that was because they want to get both sides. They want to earn more money to the detriment of their client. How you get your client the most money is that property is exposed to the most amount of people possible. That's what drives the best price. So finally, NAR gets smart and they come up with this rule called clear cooperation. So once you start marketing a listing, what is marketing, right? A for sale sign, a Facebook post, a text blast, an email blast, any type of marketing, you have 24 hours to have that property live in the MLS. The fines are pretty stiff. $500 for the first infraction, $2,000 for the second. You don't want to be fined. How do you get caught? Typically, other agents rat you out. Have an agent, her name is Monica. I get a call from her. She goes, Phil, I'm so mad. I'm mad. I'm like, oh, what's happening? Oh, I pitched this listing and I didn't get it. And now there's a for sale sign out there and I don't see it on the MLS. And I'm going to take a picture of that for sale sign and I'm sending it into the MLS. He violated I don't know if it's a guy, but they violated clear cooperation, right? Can't do that. Leasing property. We certainly can lease property. Again, you can, if it's your own property, right? You can, you can lease it. You don't have to go through the brokerage, right? But if it's, you probably want to put it in the MLS so you have more, more activity. But we can certainly, do leasing. Leasing is a part of real estate. Property management. Again, sometimes for whatever reason, I don't know why agents think, oh, I can do property management outside of the brokerage. No, can't do that. If it's your own property, you're the owner. Yeah, you can do property management for that. But if you're doing property management for someone else and it's not your property, everything, we need a property management agreement. We do property management. We probably have 50 doors, but we want to do it correctly. Again, the money comes into the brokerage, right? The tenant pays us, and then we pay the landlord and the agent their commission. Simple, clean, easy. So again, it goes back to that collecting funds, right? You can never collect any money if something is real estate services, which property management is, all through the brokerage. Business brokerage, we do that as well. Our license, it doesn't have to be real estate. There can be real estate. There doesn't have to be. Phil is very aggressive, right? I mean, he'll let you sell a business. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to call me if you have that opportunity, and we'll kind of do it together. I'm going to guide you, make sure we're doing it correctly, right? So possible, but we want to do it well, right? So check in with me. I'll guide you. We'll get it done. All right. A lot of information. Appreciate all that. Any questions on anything? Happy to answer them for you. If you're typing them in, great. Let them come in. And then we do have some other trainings. So kind of this is my series. I do it once a month. But then, Claren does a full as-is contract every other Monday. The other Monday, she does the listing agreement. Tuesday, we do Boomtown training. We do that every week. Thank you, Kia. Loop, we do every other week with Lisa. We have that social media program. We do that every Thursday with Elise. That's Dalton Wade Social and Video. We have a much more detailed new agent training that Claren does every Thursday. It's a 2-part series, right? So over 2 weeks, Thursday at 1 p.m. And then through Turner Title, we have that Turner Title Prospector. It's a pretty cool tool. They just come out with some new features, but you can take the training on that. Randy over at Turner Title will do a one-on-one demo with you. Basically, it creates farms and it, generates, who's most likely to, to list their home next. We have a net sheet calculator there, which basically will tell a seller what their proceeds are going to be. Oftentimes people are, sellers want to know, like, how much am I going to get? What are the costs, right? This will, do some different scenarios for them. And then we also have a training on, the closing statement. Because again, you want to know that. You want to know what the line items are. Again, sometimes confusing. So, we're offering these trainings all the time. So, kind of take them at your leisure and, get technically proficient. So appreciate everybody being here. 3 nights, that's awesome. Hopefully we feel like, oh, we're a little stronger agent after all this. We're here to help you. Appreciate everybody's time. Any last questions before we call it a night? Thank you, James. Good seeing you. Appreciate you being here. Awesome. Thank you, Peggy. Good seeing you. Keep in touch, everybody. Thank you, Andres. Get out there and kick some butt, guys. Sell some real estate. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your holiday. Keep in touch. Enjoy your evening. Thank you so much. Good night.